once again, welcome another freezing cold Wednesday, Mandan Chat family. Tonight we have a very special guest speaker in the building. We have Barrister Stephen Akinsanya. He'll be discussing his work and his journey in the British criminal justice system. Welcome to Mandan Chat, Stephen.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mark. Thank you for the invitation.
No worries.
Thank you
So,
for
Stephen, you wanna start from the beginning, a little bit about your background,
Sure.
childhood and stuff.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from South London, but I actually grew up and was born in Bristol. But when I was very, very young, my parents moved to Croydon, Thornton Heath, in fact, and that's primarily where I grew up. I'm the son of a Nigerian father who's late now, and a Trinidadian mother. So you can imagine that's an interesting mix. Even back all those years ago, it was considered strange for an African to marry a Caribbean, but God bless them, they did. And I'm a product of that relationship, that marriage. I have a twin sister who's an eminent scientist in America. I have two older brothers. My oldest brother's also a barrister. And I've had an interesting journey into the law. I don't know if you want me just to talk or I'm going to be asked any questions. I'll do it whichever way you want me to do it.
Any which way you want in it, but yeah, guys, if you want to ask any questions, put your hand up. Yeah?
Hands up, please. Yeah.
I guess, it starts back from, primary school in Thornton Heath was very interesting because in those days, I think many of you can attest to, or maybe not, being a child of the 70s. And, you were one of few black children in the class. So my sister
together and all of that. Yeah.
So my sister and I were one of two black children in the class. And it was tough. Racism was very prevalent. And we were made to know very clearly that we were different from the other pupils. And sadly, even some of the teaching staff were not shy in showing their racism too. So one of my vivid memories was being called Kunta Kinte after the Roots program.
Oh, no.
And I used to get really upset, and the only way I could sort of express myself was to fight with people who called me that name. But I guess even at an early age, I realized that, there's two ways to react to things. You can either just constantly be aggressive and fit into the stereotype that people want to put you in, or use things to your strength. And actually, when I started watching Alex Haley's Roots, I actually saw the strength in that character of Chicken George or Kunta Kinte. And so I didn't necessarily embrace the name, but I embraced the strength of the character. And I think that was a sort of birthplace for me, being someone who's been very resilient, which has stood me in good stead for a career in the law. Because even when I started, it was quite tough.
So that was it. Sorry, that was a turning point then. That was a...
Yeah, I think so, because I could have used it as a sort of source of aggression to lash out, find myself excluded from school and everything else that comes with it. But I didn't do that. I sort of said, you know what, this character's strong, and I'm not going to let these people defeat me. And so when I started, I think my first interest in law came from watching a program called Crown Court, which used to be on back in the 70s. And I used to look at it at lunchtime. And I was really interested in the characters, but I didn't see anybody who looked like me. But that didn't deter me. And I had an interest in criminal law even back then. I was really interested in criminal law, why people behaved in a certain way. People were innocent, fighting for the underdog. And that's something that I've carried, throughout my life, fighting for the underdog, being the voice for the oppressed. So I guess around 10 or 11 was when I really started having an interest in law. But of course, then, there was no internet. So if you wanted to find things out, you literally had to pick your 2 feet up and go to the library, and go and research stuff. And so that's really what I started to do. I started to read books and find out about things in the legal field. But then even then, I didn't know what a barrister was, other than what I saw on TV. But again, I didn't see anybody who looked like me. I mean, most of the people who were in those courtroom dramas who were black were the defendants.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had to sort of forge my way and try and understand, how this thing worked. And then, I'm always quick to tell people about the road wasn't a smooth one. So, people expect you to say, oh, I passed all my exams with flying colors, never got anything wrong, never had any failures. But I had plenty of failures. My mum's listening and she'll tell you, I was not an A-grade student. I was very capable. I was very bright. But, I just had a problem doing exams and being focused. And so I failed a lot of exams, but I always had this resolve that I was going to get there in the end. And, I managed to do that by, doing what we used to call the old O levels, and then onto my A levels, and then a degree in law. But that was only the start of it, because obviously, once you've done all of that, to become a barrister, as Kadeem will tell you, it's not easy, because you've got to get a training, what we call a pupillage in chambers, and those were like gold dust. They're even still very hard to get. And so I had to really, again, show that resolve when all the failures and all the rejections came. When I used to apply for places and they say, no, we're not interested. And I remember taking a job in the civil service, to sort of get me by until I could get my place.
Can I ask?
Fortunate.
Sorry, Steve, can I ask, where was your encouragement and your support? Where was that coming from? Was that just family, or was there?
Yeah, my parents. I mean, I have to give it up to my mum and dad, because, they were a driving force for my my development. My late father was an academic, so he valued education, and he basically said, look, I know how I came to this country as a 17-year-old with nothing, and I had to study and educate myself in order to give myself an opportunity. And he used to tell us regularly of the stories where you'd have, the signs, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs.
Yeah.
And he said the only way out for him was getting a good education. So, he encouraged all of us to embrace education. And so my influence came from my parents, definitely.
So not co-workers or co-students?
No, it's definitely my parents. And so, even when I was not always on point and failed at stuff and wasn't really focused, they still pushed me, and they still demanded more of me. And so in the long run, it stood me in good stead, because even when the failures came, I knew that they had my back and they had my best interests at heart. I can see Mark's got his hand up.
Yeah, you got a question, Mark?
Yeah, Stephen. Yeah. What sort of things did you sort of do after leaving school? What sort of jobs and that did you do before, or did you go straight into sort of law from college, or did you have to?
No, it's a good question, Mark, because as I said, I had to embrace failure. So I messed up my A levels, so I couldn't go straight to university because I didn't get the grades. So my dad said to me, look, I'm not having any freeloaders in the house. You need to go and get yourself a job. So I got myself a job in the civil service, and I was working in Victoria for the Inland Revenue as a collection agent. And I was doing my A-level resits by night school. And so I worked as a civil servant, and I remember all my co-workers used to laugh at me when I said, look, I'm not going to be here for long, because I'm going to finish my A-levels, I'm going to get the grades I need, and then I'm going to be going off to university to study law. And they said, no, once you become a civil servant, you'll be here like the rest of us. And I said, okay, no problem. I'm happy for you and the choices you've made, but I know where I'm going. So I just carried on doing my exams quietly, or my studying for my exams quietly without anybody knowing, until I had to sit the exam. And then I sat the exams and got the grades that I needed to go off to university.
That's good. Yeah, the vision.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
And so, you know, I I think I was naive thinking, oh, I've arrived because I've got my law degree now. This is after, you know, 2 years of intense study, got my law degree. And I was thinking, oh, this is it. I'm made. But that was only the start, because to get a place in chambers as what you call a tenant in chambers, they were like, it's like gold dust after you've done your pupillage. And many of my white counterparts, they went straight from their pupillage into getting tenancies, and they were able to start practicing. Whereas me, I couldn't get a tenancy. So I was busy looking for a tenancy for 3 years. And I was what you call a squatter. And I was squatting in chambers, um, trying to practice law, but not having a permanent seat in chambers. Because in order to sort of practice and build up your reputation, you have to be almost like a full member. I see Kadeem's got his hand up.
Yeah, you got a question, Kadeem?
I can just share something with you. When I went for my pupillage interview, they asked me, first of all, we don't normally interview people from other universities. So that was a right start for me, because I thought, there's no way I'm going to get in here. So I said, you mean Leeds and Leicester? You know. And the second thing is, if we were to offer you a pupillage, would you be going home afterwards? And I'm saying, home, Leeds.
Yeah.
You know, obviously it was it meant something else.
No, well, I can definitely attest to that, because I remember distinctly, and I even shared this story the other day of my interview in one set of chambers where they asked me, the first question was where I was from. And when I said Bristol, they said, where are you really from? And then I remember them asking me a stupid question about whether, if I was offered a cup of tea, what kind of cup would I use? And I said, well, I would use a mug because it was more practical. You get more tea in it. And they said, oh, no. In these chambers, we only use bone china.
Oh, gosh.
And I knew then that wasn't the place for me. But, you know, getting a tenancy in chambers was very, very difficult. But, you know, you only need one opportunity sometimes in life to take it to the next level. And I'm forever grateful to one particular set of chambers that offered me a tenancy, which allowed me to start my practice. And, you know, back in those days, although I was interested in criminal law, I actually wanted to do something else. I was more interested in entertainment, music, sports law. But back then, you know, you didn't see any black faces in that area, and it was so hard to get into. And so many of us, I won't say we're forced into, but in order just to get our feet on the ladder in the profession, agreed to do, you know, things like criminal law, family law, contract law. But, you know, I've been very blessed because I've built a very good reputation and practice in that field. So I don't knock it. And the other thing I would say is, you know, sometimes, and I see it today with some of the, you know, the junior lawyers, you know, I know Kadeem's also quite senior as well. I mean, this will be my 30th year at the bar. But some of the junior lawyers forget, and I regularly have to pull them up to say, you know what, you might think you've just arrived, but you have to remember you stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, people who came before us who really put in the hard graft and took a lot of the flack in the court. So, you know, I want to shout out Rudy Narayan, Courtney Griffiths, John Roberts, Lincoln Crawford. I mean, these are guys I looked up to who'd been there and done it. You know, even when I was even thinking about becoming a lawyer, they were already in it. And so I think it's always important to remember that, you know, before you, there were others and they paid a sacrifice.
Those
really
that paved the way.
Yeah, really important.
Mark, you had a question? You had your hand up?
Yeah, just a quick one. Just for the uninformed on here, Stephen, could you kind of just explain what chambers is and what it represents, and And maybe can you even tell us a little bit about which black barristers were around when you actually, or if there were any, when you actually got into the chambers or got, you know, or got called into the bar? I know you mentioned one name, Rudy Nari, and I remember him. I remember my brother used to always talk highly of that man. I
Yeah.
don't really know much about him, but I just remember the name.
Yeah, so I mean, chambers is a collection of barristers where in up and down the country. It's almost like a law firm, but it's a law firm that's for barristers where they all practice from. And as I say, getting a place in chambers is really, really difficult. It's the most sought after thing after you finish your training, because there are very few places on offer, and you usually have, you know, 100, 200 applicants sometimes for one or two places. So, you know, it was really, really competitive. And obviously, as a young black lawyer, you're up against people who've been to Oxbridge, Cambridge, the traditional backgrounds. And back in those days, you know, if you didn't fit in to certain criteria, you wouldn't get into the top chambers. I mean, I'm glad things are changing now. But for me, when I was starting out, there were people who I could look up to. One of my friends from school, who was in the sixth form when I was in the first year, he was already embarking on his journey into law. So I had him as a role model. One of my cousins was a barrister, and so I'd seen that he'd achieved it. And so there were people I could see, and I'd actually seek them out to find out how they had done it. And try and even connect with them so that they could become like mentors, to give me encouragement, because, you know, there was always a lot of rejection, and many of the people that I started out with didn't stay the distance. They gave up.
Can I ask you a question, Stephen, and while we're talking about the bar? When first, thank you for coming on Man in Chat. When I was growing up and was involved in certain things, illegal things, I'd say, there was an argument to say that most cases are already decided at the bar before they go to court. Is that true?
Most cases are decided at the bar before they go to court.
Yeah. Before you actually appear in court.
Not in my experience. What I do know is that in some circuits, I mean, certainly in London, I can only speak for London because that's where I do predominantly most of my work. But I know in some circuits, up and down the country, certain deals were done between the lawyers before the cases got into court, because people just wanted to get the cases over and done with. Right. So some people, you know, were encouraged to plead guilty and not have a trial. But, you know, I'm sure it went on. I'm sure, you know, all sorts of things went on, because no system is perfect. But certainly, you know, for those of us, for the black lawyers, we were just grateful to get work and be able to build a practice and be able to go to court and do the job that we'd trained for. So we weren't looking just to, you know, to make some money and move on to the next case. We actually wanted to defend people, represent people.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, practice is interesting, because at the start you're trying to build a reputation. And I guess one good thing about being a person of color, a black person, or in the profession, is that you're pretty much known very quickly if you're good, because there are so few of you. And if you've got, you know, a unique name, everybody will know your name. Like I can see Kadeem now, and I know exactly who he is. So, you know, and that's the beauty of the profession, that when there's so few of you, you know each other. You might not know each other very well, but you know the face, and there's a sort of camaraderie that you get with being very few of you. But there's certainly a lot more black barristers than when I started. Even back in the day, you literally know everybody.
What would you say the percentages are now then, roughly? Of our representation in there?
Wow. I still don't think we're up to, what do you think, Kadeem? I don't think we're up to 20 or 30%. I don't know.
It's not even that, man. It's probably about 6%, if that.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
the further you
6.
come out of London, the less. I mean, when I came to the bar in Leeds, I've been practicing for about 30 years,
Yeah.
and there was only one black counsel,
Wow.
and there was two Asian barristers. That's how, and now probably about half a dozen,
Okay.
black,
Mm,
and probably about a dozen Asians,
mm.
and only 2 females.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I for the first time in all these years, I was in Leicester Crown Court last week, and yeah, I mean, I was the only black barrister in the robing room, and I was thinking, wow, um, I wonder how many black barristers there are practicing, on the Midlands and Northern circuits. I mean, there's a lot more of us in London, but still, as Kadeem says, the numbers are still, incredibly small,
It's
which
really
is,
low.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
they control the numbers. They control the number of ethnic minorities coming into the profession. I still
Coming in.
believe that.
You think so?
Yes, definitely, man.
Wow.
Certainly outside of London.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know professionally, but London, I think black people do have a lot more opportunities,
Mm.
in London, and I suppose maybe, and it's just mainly London and maybe surrounding areas. But when you go outside of that, that's when you buck up the real.
But this is one of the reasons why I've taken it upon myself to become immersed in the profession's business, i.e., I sit on the panels for interviews for scholarships for trainee barristers,
Right.
because it's very important that once we've established ourselves in the profession, that we give back and ensure that there are more of us coming through. Because if we're not in the panel discussions for people looking for a scholarship, because it's very expensive to get into law, if we're not representative on those panels, then I've been in meetings where you've had very good black candidates, and people have said, oh, but they're not, they haven't gone to the right university, or their A levels are not quite as good as somebody else's. And I said, no, look, give this guy a chance. So it's really important, and I encourage the junior lawyers, it's okay to make it into the profession, but always look back. Don't keep looking up. Look back to help others.
Yeah. Pulling up the
Desmond.
ladder behind you should not be a thing that we should ever practice.
Absolutely. I'm 100% in that. And, my work has sort of changed over the years, because I've gone from doing sort of just regular crime now to doing a lot of crime involving youngsters, knife crime, gun crime, drugs. And that's the thing that I'm really passionate about, because it's actually dawned on me after maybe my 10th murder case that, we're losing a young generation of young men up and down the country. Kadeem will tell you about the joint enterprise law and the effect that has had on young men, groups of young men literally entering the criminal justice system and then being weighed off. Just last week, and this is something that's still very raw for me. Look, okay, a group of young men took somebody's life. So there are no winners. That's the starting point. But you've got 18-year-olds, as my client was, who are getting a life sentence. And what a lot of people don't know is the law has changed in terms of the minimum term that young people are getting. He got a 29-year tariff. And one of his friends, who's a year older than him, his tariff was 32 years. So he's got to do 32 years behind the door
before
he's even considered for release. And, once you're in the hands of the justice system, you might never be released.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, each week we hear about, a knife murder, or the number of people who are affected, not just the victim and their family, but the families of these young men who maybe are on the periphery of it. They're not actually directly involved, but they're there, or they're associates. And their lives have been just taken away, they'll be coming out when they're 45, 47 years of age.
For just being at the wrong place at the wrong time.
crazy.
These were not the sort of murders that we used to see 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
There used to be, proper murders. Every loss of life is a different thing, but the type of knife crime, the murders weren't usually knife crime and involving young people. It is now because everybody carries one.
Yeah.
That's it.
Sorry, Desmond, did you have a question?
Yes. Greetings, Council.
Hi, Desmond. How are you?
Are you Casey?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, hope you achieve it. I just wanted to ask, really, it's a question that I've had some occasion where I've gone to employment tribunal, and I'm coming up against, I've came up against a number of black counsel for the other side. And I came to this sort of a conclusion that being a black legal representative, whether a counsel or everyday solicitor, would you say you're an officer of the court firstly, and secondly your client, or is it the other way around?
Well, you're supposed to be an officer of the court. That's how it
well,
should work.
This is where some I am very kind of suspicious of the legal profession, because if you're supposed to be the representative for your client, then your loyalty should be firstly and foremostly and ultimately to your client.
Yeah, I agree with that. But you've also got to remember that sometimes your clients don't always tell you the full story. And, I've just told you my journey to how I got this far. And one thing, and Kadeem will most probably agree with me, there is no way I'm going to compromise all that I've worked for because of a client who, if it goes wrong, will turn around and blame me. The thing is, with a lot of work we do, your client's your best friend until something goes wrong, and then all of a sudden you're his worst enemy. And of course, when people lash out, being human nature, the first person they want to blame is their representation or the representative. So I'm always an officer of the court first, because I've had my fingers burnt before, where I've gone all out for a client, and then the client has not got the result that they've wanted, and their first point of appeal is my lawyer was rubbish.
Okay.
I mean, when you say we're confusing officer with the officer of the court and our duty to the court, that is basically there to ensure that we do not lie or mislead the court. It's not about representing your client. You still represent your client to the best of your ability, and if it involves taking on the court, then you will. But
of course,
you're not there to lie for him. If he lies to you, and that's a different story. But if he tells you he's done it, and then you tell the court, oh, he's not done it, you can't do that.
So
that's the number one question I get asked at parties. How do you represent someone who's told you they've done it? And I said, well, no one in all these years has told me they've killed somebody and I've gone and represented them. I couldn't do it.
So you're basically working within the parameters of the law, innit?
Exactly.
Within it, and then you can use certain parts of it to help you further down the line.
Yeah.
As long as they're telling the truth and they're being honest.
I mean, the thing is, but you might think when you hear an account by your client, well, what a load of rubbish. But your job is not to judge whether or not they're telling you the truth. Your job is to ask them what their instructions are and then advance that before the court. And I always say to people, look, certainly in criminal law, you can't be all things. You can only be one thing. So you're either the defense lawyer or the prosecutor, but you can't be the judge and the jury. That they have their respective functions, and the jury were the ones who listen to the evidence.
I always tell people there are 12 people to decide your case. I'm just one.
Exactly.
And when I say to the jury, in a closing speech, and I say there are 13 judges, but only 12 matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you would say the jury of your peers is your safeguard.
Sorry, say that again, Desmond.
I said, would you say that the jury of your peers
and I put the peers in bracket, is your only safeguard really?
Well, look, I'll tell you this, you know, I've been in jurisdictions where they don't want to have any juries. It's judge alone trying a case. And I have to say, you know, with all of the shortcomings that we do have, I would rather take my chances in front of 12 people who don't know me than just having a judge, a jury of your peers. And, you know, I say this regularly. I've been in enough cases now where the only black people in the courtroom are the defendant and me defending with an all-white jury, and they found that person not guilty.
Wow.
So I have faith in the justice system. I mean, we hear a lot of stories about bias and racism, and I've been in cases where one particular juror might have displayed some kind of bias towards a black defendant, and all the other jurors gang up on them.
Yeah, that's more so now.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they're a jury and they decide, nah, you know what, I think he's innocent, everybody else is on them. I say, nah, they think he's guilty. Wow.
I mean, sometimes you just got people who bring their prejudice into the jury room. And other jurors say, we're not having that. You know, forget the color of the person. We're here to decide whether he did it or not based on the evidence. And we don't care what color the person is. So sometimes I've got black defendants who say, oh, I've got no chance. But I've been in places where, as I say, the jury, because of where the place is going to be all white. And they found black defendants not guilty.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I've got something similar happened. I work in mental health, Stephen, and I had to go to one of my clients was up at Luton Crown Court for aggressive begging, and you know, but I thought, you know, because of his, you know, long and enduring mental illness and things he's been through, I thought, you know, he would have, you know, got probably a slap on the wrist and stuff. So the surreal thing, I went to Luton Crown Court and everyone in the court was black, Stephen, everyone. Wow. Every person from the judge to the two barristers, you know, the woman taking the notes, the security guard, everyone. Yeah. There was not a white person in there, and was there. And yeah, the judge, man, she gave him 6 months. Wow. And when I went back to work, my boss was saying, "Where is he? What's happened to him?" And I said, "Oh, Gov, he got 6 months." And she's like, "Oh, what didn't you tell him about his mental health problems?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I told him all of that, man." She wasn't having it.
Yeah.
Was that that would have been Barbara Mensa?
Judge, I was going to say, Judge, Barbara doesn't mess about. I know her.
Man. So that didn't save him. I thought he would have been all right that day, man, but no chance.
I might just say that I got a jury service letter came from my door today.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, jury service.
You'll enjoy it. I tell you what, you know, you'll really enjoy it because you get a bird's eye view of how really criminal law works. You know, you're gonna see the barristers in action. You're gonna see a real life case, and it'll give you a real better appreciation for the criminal justice system and the fact that, you know, the job that we do is it. You know, when we were on strike, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, these fat cat lawyers." But until you're in trouble and you need a barrister, you don't realize the work and the worth of having a good lawyer in your corner.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, you'll enjoy it. You'll really enjoy
I did think that to myself. I thought, you know what,
you'll get called for jury service.
Huh?
Yeah, I don't think people like us would get called for jury service.
Well, this is the second time.
Mark, I've done jury service.
Nobody's exempt, you know, anymore. Even
no,
judges
once you're on the electoral roll, no one's exempt.
Oh, it doesn't matter if you've got a criminal record then.
No, if you've got a criminal record, I think they don't do it.
Then you can't. Yeah. But judges are not exempt. Barristers are not exempt.
Yeah.
So if you've got a criminal record, they won't send you for jury service.
Yeah, I've done a jury service.
I won't get called.
Yeah, how come I got twice then?
Yeah, I've done a jury service where we were sent away to deliberate, and as we got into the room, this white gentleman said, "I think he's guilty." So I said, "Yeah, I think so too." And everybody looked at me. But I said, thankfully, I'm not here to judge what I think. I'm here to assess the evidence.
Well done, Desmond. Well done, Desmond.
Yeah, and he got off it because the didn't support his prejudice.
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah,
And
but I
that's why I
just
love the
went,
jury system. That
yeah, I
is
went
exactly
along with
why.
him. Yeah, I
You
went
know.
along with him and say, well, yeah, from if he was caught with some dope and he said it wasn't his, then
Like I,
so I said,
like
yeah,
I usually,
he's
like I
guilty
usually
of-
say in some of the speeches I do, I say, you know, we don't deal in probabilities. Carlsberg probably is the best lager in the world, but then we don't.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
and
I
that's the
just
beauty
love
of the
that.
system. That's the beauty of the system that you know, you got the evidence has got to lead you one way or the other. And so equally, there are people who are guilty who get found not guilty, but invariably they'll be back before the courts again. But you know, it's a system that we're in. But you know, returning to the sort of discussion, you know, it's not an easy environment. I still feel a bit like when I was at school that you've got to be twice as well prepared as your counterpart when you go into court. People are always wanting or expecting you to mess up. They are looking at what you say with an air of suspicion even before you've opened your mouth. Do you really know what you're doing? I've even been in situations where people have been outwardly hostile because they don't believe you have a place. You shouldn't be here. But I'm old enough and ugly enough and big enough now to not care and you know, if someone gets in my face, I let them know about it. But it's sad that it still happens. You know, we're in 2023, and I thought in 1993 when I started that it was tough, and I've endured all this time. But to see that these things still happen is sad. But I think part of the reason why it still happens is there are not enough of us in the judiciary. I mean, Kadim's talked about 6%. It can't even be 2% of the judiciary that are Black and Asian. You know, there are very few Black and Asian judges. And I mean, they're even conscious of it where they're trying to recruit more. But, you know, until we get to that position, the profession still is going to be principally white, upper class, middle class white men predominantly. But we have to fight our corner because our communities need to see us in the courtroom.
Stephen, can I just ask an additional question?
Yes, sir.
Do you think it would be a useful exercise to carry out in terms of occasionally visiting secondary schools to sort of give sort of a talk? Because the reason I said that is I've got a 16-year-old and he recently did his mock and his grades were predicted at a certain level to the point where he was noticed. So he was invited to Oxford to have a look around. And until then, he didn't really see himself going to Oxford, but now he's consciously, purposely thinking about it as a normal course of action. So this idea of modeling in terms of raising aspiration, do you see yourself having a role in doing that with younger people?
Well, sir, let me tell you, I've been doing it now for 20 years. I've been a mentor now for 20 years, individually and corporately with people like Urban Synergy. We've been going into schools. I'm even looking up on my diary here. I've got an appointment in the school in Kent on the 9th of May. Because like you say, it's really important to get into the schools, to be visible. Because a lot of these kids and a lot of the youngsters that I've represented say, oh, I never knew there were Black barristers until, you know, I saw you walk in the room. And a lot of these aspirational challenges that we have for some of our young people is because we're not visible. So I say, you know, why is it, you know, you've got to understand that there are Black plumbers, electricians, doctors, politicians, businessmen. We're in all spheres of life. But if we're going to really encourage some of these youngsters to be what they're supposed to be, we have to be visible. And on your point about Oxbridge, You know, I meet a lot of young black kids who are brilliant, who don't want to go to Oxford and Cambridge because they feel their face doesn't fit. And I'm saying, no, you've earned the right to be there academically, and we need to be in these spaces. Do you know the first black barrister I researched, the first black barrister was Christian Cole, who went to Oxford with the same time as Oscar Wilde. And there's a report online about his first day in the High Court, and the reception that he got when he turned up, and the judge was wondering who he was, and this man started quoting Shakespeare like nobody's business, and they couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Christian Cole. So look, and this is why I say we have to remember those who came before us, because when we realize there are those who came before us many, many centuries ago, then the journey should not be a difficult one. We should not be deterred. We should remain positive because others have done it.
I think that's
Stephen,
so
Desmond,
true.
I mean, one of the things that ethnic minorities.
1 minute, Kadeem, sorry. I think what you just said there, Stephen, was so poignant. We should remember who's come before us and laid the pathway. But at the same time, a lot of the youth do have a sense of feeling like they don't fit in anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like school, uni, college, they always feel like it's not for them. Do you know what I mean? And that's the sad thing. You're right. We need to just.
Well, and that's why we need to be visible, because I could have taken the view that uni wasn't for me, or I didn't fit in. Kadeem could have said that. Yeah. The point is, you know, and this is why I say it's incumbent on all of us, whatever we do. I'm not just saying about lawyers. Whatever we do where we can have a sphere of influence for the next generation, we have to be visible. Yeah. So that young kid who says, you know what, I'd love to run my own business being an electrician, but he doesn't know an electrician. Yeah. If you're an electrician and you're skilled, be visible. Sure. You know?
Sorry, Kadeem, go ahead.
The point that I was going to make was that ethnic minorities tend not to get their experience early enough. They get to find out once they've gone through high school, gone to university, and then they start looking for training and apprenticeships and lawyers. All these other kids have done it since they were 14 and 15, 13 and 14. True. They've been working in solicitors' offices. They already know how the system works. I mean, I'll tell you an anecdote. There was a member of our chambers who was no longer alive, and he said to me one day when we were doing a case, he goes, "You lot stick together." I says, "What do you mean, you lot?" Yeah. I said, I don't know what you mean by that. Because you know what I mean. You lot, you stick together. I said, maybe I'm a bit dense. I'm a bit thick. Just explain to me, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, you're black. Your solicitor's black, and your client may be black. I said, I still don't understand what you mean. So I said, let me just get this right. I said, you're white, your solicitor's white, and your client may be black or white. Is it the same thing? And it dawned on him, thinking, oh my God, I hadn't thought of it like that.
No, that's right. And the other thing that I guess I can sort of say in this space is the thing that upsets me with a lot of these big cases, they go on for quite a long time, usually if they're multi-handed cases. And, I get to hear some of the conversations in the robing room. Most of them are not cases involving black lawyers. There's maybe one or two. And, these big cases, certainly for some of the KCs who are leading these cases, are well paid. Even by today's standard, they're fairly well paid. And you've got young kids from our communities who made wrong choices or got themselves involved in something where potentially they're going to lose the best part of their life. And these guys are doing their job, being well paid, but they can afford to put their kids in the best schools, send them to the best universities. And it's on the back of our youngsters who are committing stupid offenses where they're going to be incarcerated for the best part of their lives. Now, many people won't say that, because it might not be politically correct or it might get people's back up. But it doesn't go unnoticed that when I'm talking to my colleagues about the schools that their children went to and what their children are doing, and then I'm looking at this young black kid from some inner city area from a deprived background, and I'm thinking, what a waste.
You mentioned, Stephen, you mentioned mentoring. Can you tell us more about a life of focus, please?
Yeah, Life of Focus was born out of I did a case, the Clapham South murder. A young man was murdered outside Clapham South tube station, and my client was found not guilty. And I remember going down at the Old Bailey to see him, and saying to him, "Son, you've just been given your life back. I want you to go out and be the person that you were called to be." And this kid looked at me and he started crying and he hugged me. He said, "You're the first male figure who's ever endorsed me. I don't know who my dad is, but no one's ever told me I could amount to much, but you seem to have so much belief in me." And, ever since I was a young boy, I've always been obsessed with purpose and destiny. Why was I born black? Why was I born in 1967 to the parents that I was born to in the area that I was born in? And I've always lived my life on the basis of, if I'm lucky, and God bless Desmond, if God gives me 70 years and 10, I want to make it. I want to make it count for something. I need to make it count for something. I need to leave a legacy, because it's not just about my own journey. So Life in Focus was born out of that, and I was so frustrated. And some of you may have seen a video that I did on YouTube about what it means to be on trial at the Old Bailey. I think 60,000 people saw it, and it was seen in the Caribbean, in Africa. And I was basically telling the story about what it means to be on trial, and how you can be a young kid from the inner city, being twisted and turned upside down by a public school educated lawyer who has the most beautiful command of English. And before you know it, you're admitting to things you haven't done. And then you're off to prison for a very long time. And said, why is it we have to learn the lesson in the courtroom? Why can't they learn the lesson before? So Life in Focus was a sort of brainchild of mine to get this message out there for the youngsters to understand what it means to be in the criminal justice system. Because one thing, when you're on the road, your brethren don't talk to you about what happens at the other end. And everyone's your friend till you get in prison, and then everybody deserts you. No one's going to stick around for 30 years waiting, saying that's my brethren. They move on. So I wanted the youngsters to understand that. So it's Life in Focus informs and educates and inspires the kids to say, look, there's another way. I want to signpost you and connect you to people who can help you be the person you were supposed to be. So if your interest is in sport, can connect you with people who are at the top of their field. If your interest is in science or business, I can connect you to people in the community who are doing these things, and they can show you how they've done it, and you can really connect with them, because a lot of it's signposting. If you don't see someone, if you don't see someone doing the thing you're interested in, you think it's not for you.
Oh, that's really good, Stephen. Yeah, really good. Yeah. Would you say, I mean, the state of our youngers at the moment, would you say it's like a PTSD they're going through or something, the way?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I look at it sometimes and it almost seems like alien to me. I don't know where we went wrong. I don't know if it was the acceleration of technology. I don't know if it's because we've become so materialistic. I don't know if it's because we're trying to live our lives vicariously through other people by what we see rather than being what we should be individually. I don't know, but there is and I'm always quick to say this, it's not everybody, but there is a section of our society who are lost.
The environment, isn't it? It's that environment they're in.
Yeah.
It just breeds it.
Yeah. And the problem is they don't even see it until it's too late. I mean, this case I've just finished is a classic example. 3 young black guys, 18, 18, and 19, got themselves involved in county lines, supplying drugs, thinking they were making money. They take out another rival drug dealer. he's dead. They're now serving life in prison with a minimum term of 29 years, and they haven't got a penny to show for it. It's not like they've invested their money in stocks and shares and they've got property, you know, they've got nothing. And so there's a cycle of youngsters who are just caught up in this stuff. And, you know, we need to do something to get them out, because, as I said to you, when I see these cases and I see groups of young men being incarcerated, you're having communities being literally wiped out, potential fathers wiped out. They're not going to have children. And, you know, that's the reality of it. And often a lot of these kids who I've represented, you know, to a man, they're brilliant, bright young men. I remember saying to my client last week, he'd been following the case, and then he'd written out a script of questions and things that he wanted to raise with me. And I said to him, you know, if I read this as a news report, you could be a journalist on a top newspaper. He said, really? I said, yeah, I'm reading this and it's so well written. I said, why, you know, imagine if you were a journalist being paid to write. And he said, wow, I've never thought about that. And that's the tragedy of it, that some of these youngsters are so gifted, but they've either not recognized their gift, or someone has not said to them, listen, there's another way. There's another way that you can live a life that's fulfilled with longevity, with purpose, with certainty, without having to look over your shoulder. And you can be very comfortable. He said to me, God, having met you now for the last 13 weeks, I see how you live your life and the way you behave, and you're not even a footballer. I said, yeah. And I said to him, that's the point. You don't need to be a celebrity or a footballer to live a decent life and enjoy some of the finer things in life without having to cut corners.
Sorry to cut you, Stephen. Do you think that's the point right there, that we haven't, the elder generation haven't displayed success to enough of these the younger generation, obviously by us being successful in, you know, education, becoming professionals, business owners, and things like this? Do you think that's what a big part of the reason is?
I think so. I think so. I definitely think so, because, you know, for a lot of these guys, when their aspirations are limited to, oh, you know, I'm gonna make some peas, you know, selling drugs on the county line. And I'm saying, but if you understood how the world worked, you'd be better off getting a decent job that pays you 9 to 5, where you actually have some savings, and then invest in a little property, and then invest in the next property. And I start explaining them about, you know, what it means to remortgage, what it means to do a place up and sell it on to make a profit. Because a lot of these guys have got the business mind, but it's in the wrong thing.
That's right.
Yeah. Johnson, sorry, do you have more to say, man?
No, go on, bro.
Johnson had a question. Can you share the link for the Life in Focus?
Oh, yeah.
If anything, I'll just type it in.
I've got to remember what it is now. I'll do the link for the Instagram, and then that should lead to the website, which is still being developed.
Okay. Yeah, I think it is. You're right. I think you're right there. Both of you, Marvin and Stephen. It's about seeing someone in that position where you aspire to be, isn't it?
I mean, look. I'm not here to start. I'm not here to start boasting about anything. But I said to this young kid, I said, you realize, you know, 40 years of age, my desire was to own a Ferrari. So I went out and bought one.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not a footballer. I don't have it anymore, because I valued putting my kids through school over owning a piece of metal. But the point is, I wanted to have that car, and I didn't need to commit crime to do it. I didn't need to sell drugs to do it. I didn't need to be a footballer to do it. I just organized myself in a way where I could afford to do it. And so these youngsters need to understand that, you know, what the world is telling them, what society is telling them about what success looks like is skewed. Because even if you never owned a sports car, real success is the man who gets up and does an honest day's graft, looks after his family, treats people properly, and looks out for his mum. You know,
true.
and that's where we've lost it. You know, look, my mum's listening. She's 84 years of age.
Kudos to her still, blessed to her still. And International Women's Day as well. Hail up the Queen.
Yeah, so you know, we've got a lot of work to do, and you know, I can say this as a room of black men. You know, it's incumbent on us. You know, we can't. No, I always say to people, look, no one's coming. The government introduced this legislation last summer, and a lot of people don't even know, but it was designed to catch more of our young people, to incarcerate more of our young people. So now, where last year, if you were convicted of a murder case where you were carrying a weapon and it was a murder for gain, you would have got a 12-year sentence as a starting point. Now the starting points jump from 12 to 30 years.
Wow.
And a lot of our youngsters don't even know it. So they're going out and doing their little thing on the road and getting involved in county lines. Then someone pulls a knife, someone gets stabbed. They didn't mean to kill them, but because they juked them in the femoral artery and they bled out and died, they're getting 30 years and they don't even know.
But as you say, look, they're setting these tariffs. You understand? They're not trying to tackle the root causes.
Of course they're not, Marvin.
You understand? So as you just said, I'm a big believer in this, and everyone on there knows this. I'm always telling them we've got to do this ourselves, and until we realize that we got to do this ourselves, nothing's going to happen. It's only going to get worse. It's going to start coming to each of our own doorstep.
Exactly.
Until we realize. Do you understand?
You know what, Marvin? I was in a meeting this week and someone said to me, you know, why do you get so worked up? Because look, I've got 2 sons, and I remember
I've got 9 sons, brother.
Wow. I mean, I remember sitting at the table on that last murder case, and I was looking at the pictures of this young dead black boy and how they performed the autopsy on him. And my son came into the kitchen and he saw me with tears in my eyes. And he says, Dad, what are you crying for? And I said, you know what? This thing gets ever closer to home the older you get. Because here I've got a young 18-year-old. I don't know much about him, but I know he was at college. You're 18. You go to college. Anything could happen to you. And until I see these kids as my own, then I can't just turn my eye to it and say, oh, I'm a defense barrister and that's all I am. I'm more than that.
How do you cope with that, though? Seeing some of the stuff that you obviously have seen. How do you cope with that?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm fortunate that I managed to switch off. You know, I love my music. I was a DJ for many years. I still love my music. I still love, you know, I've got my pastime of cars and things like that. So I do switch off, but I'm finding as I get older, you know, I'm 50. How old am I, Mum? I'm 56 this year. You know, I'm becoming more and more traumatized by it because I'm seeing a generation being lost. And that's why I'm saying, listen, my time in the profession is short now. And I've got maybe another 10, 15 years at best. So I need to make it count, whether it's from the position of becoming a judge or continuing doing what I'm doing. I've got to leave a legacy. I've got to do something which steers, even if it's 1 or 2 on the right path, it's got to be worth it.
That'd be amazing to be a judge, though, isn't it? Do you know, is there a black judge in England?
Yeah, there are a few, but not enough. Maybe Kadeem will get there before me, you know, but we need more judges.
There's one in Luton, Skip, but she's strict narrated, boy.
You said.
You come up against Judge Benson.
So how much more studying would that take, Stephen, for you to become a judge?
Well, there's not much more studying. In fact, it's a selection process. You fill in a form, you then get selected to go to some training days, and if you're successful, they'll appoint you. But you know, Kadeem will tell you it's a very, very detailed and arduous process. It's not always fair, because sometimes you see people saying, how on earth did they become a judge? And I don't know really, I don't really know the ins and outs fully of how they really go about selecting people. But I've only applied once before, and that was to become a part-time judge, not a full-time judge.
I applied only once as well, and I got through to the selection stage.
Right.
And then they had an interview on the telephone. Yeah. I mean, I don't know any job, man, that you go for such a powerful job that you're being interviewed by 3 people on a telephone, not Zoom, not Zoom. So you can't even look in the whites of their eyes and say, you know, who you're looking into.
Yeah.
And that, in
So
fact, Kadeem's just put it in the.
So your application was. Sorry, go on, Stephen.
No, sorry, Marvin. I was just saying, you know, Kadeem's just reinforced the point that a lot of these youngsters and their families don't understand. You know, the minimum term, you get life is the tariff for murder. That's standard. That's a mandatory sentence. But the minimum term is 30. So I get kids saying, yeah, that's all right, I'll do 15. No. That's 30. So think about Charles Bronson, and he's done 50 odd years. You're not far behind him. You're going to do 30, and then you're going to be at the mercy of the parole board, who, if they don't like you,
they still don't have to. They still don't have to let you out.
Thank you. And then 30. Even when they release you, Marvin, you're on a life license. They don't get it. I said to a young kid, "Have you ever been to Disney?" I said, "No." Well, guess what? You ain't going, because the Americans they won't allow you in.
No, they won't got a criminal record. Yeah, it affects their life in so many different ways.
You know, even today, I've got a meeting tomorrow because I'm so upset about this with this new law. I've got a meeting tomorrow with a cartoonist where I'm doing a series of short videos to do with life sentences that I want to have played in every single school.
Wow.
So these kids know what's coming if they make the wrong choices.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Mark,
Mark's
you got
his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just on a sort of slightly different note. You mentioned his name, and a few of us here are from the Luton area. In your opinion, and Kadeem as well, would you let out Charlie?
Yeah, I met him. I've had the pleasure of meeting him.
Yeah.
And you know, I've been following the debate all of this week, actually, and I watched the documentary last week, and I think this is a classic example of the system literally having control of an individual, because at the end of the day, the man's 70 years of age, and you know, there is a way of managing him in the community. Then there must be, but to keep a man literally in custody, and not just custody, but he's in solitary most of the time as a Cat A prisoner, to me that's inhumane. He hasn't killed anybody. You know, okay, he's had his ups and downs in prison, and he's done some crazy things, even by his own admission. But come on, for the sake of humanity, let the man see his last years out. He wants to even just see his mum. Let the man spend his last days as a free man. You know, one of my favorite films ever is The Shawshank Redemption. And, you know, every time I watch it, I'm moved to tears, because that's how the system can literally rob you of your whole life. And that's why with the youngsters, I get so angry. I said, you've just given your life over to the system. And for what?
You sound like an honourable man, Stephen, definitely. Yeah, well, good man to have in your corner.
It's the way my parents raised me, I think. You know, my dad was a man of principle, and, you know, my mum tried to do right by me, and that's the way I choose to live life.
Yeah, thank you for your service, there's no doubt. Anybody else with one more question before we wrap up?
Yes, Stephen, can I recommend my my book to you and Kadeem? It's called Stolen Inheritance.
Stolen Inheritance by Desmond Clark.
Yeah.
Get your plug in there, Desi boy.
Yeah, because no, well, when you've achieved something, you want to share it.
Of course.
Right.
Of course.
So if you don't share it, it's not as enjoyable, is it?
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah,
something that
so-
Stephen and I will probably advocate generally is if you know people who want to do a mini pupillage, somebody who wants to come into the law, get in touch with us or get in
Yeah.
touch with Stephen. There's lots of people that will take on somebody for a week. I mean, I like Stephen, take on many more than we're supposed to according
Yeah.
to the system.
Yeah.
Our system only allows a certain number of people to come into chambers to do a mini pupillage.
Yeah.
I bypass that and
Me
I simply
too.
say, if anybody wants to come, they come next week, they come the
Yeah.
week after, whenever they're free.
Yeah, me too. No, Kadim's absolutely right. I mean, you know, often people contact my chambers and they've given a rebuff of, oh, we only allow a certain number of people. I tell people, look, if you're interested in the law and you want to just come and spend some time, contact me directly. I'm not hiding. You'll find me very easily. So reach out, you know?
Definitely. Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, just a quick one when we're wrapping up. Stephen, you say you're into music, yeah?
Yeah.
You're a DJ, yeah. One time I actually even played a gig in Middle Temple.
Did you?
Yeah. And in the room, I think they were saying about the room we was in, I think Shakespeare performed Midsummer Night's Dream in there or
Oh,
something.
really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was in the Middle Temple. Yeah, it was a very strange kind of setup, that place, man. It's like, yeah, it's like something like Harry Potter in there, isn't it?
Is that the
Yeah,
Octagon place?
I mean, all the
right
foreigns are very unique. They're all
It's really old, Skip. It's really, really old. It's like,
Yeah.
just like Harry Potter.
That's
kind of.
I
right.
didn't know you was initiated, Mark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
You know,
didn't
visit
Didn't know you was
that be saying.
initiated.
But that
You
we
should
say,
all
no,
visit
I
because-
played a wedding reception in there.
Wow.
Yeah, so you're into music as well, Stephen. What kind of music are you
Oh,
into?
big time. Anything from the 70s R&B, what you call old school soul.
Rare Groove, man, yeah.
Rare Groove, that's me. Yeah. I'm looking at all my records right now. I'm still traditional. I still use the vinyl.
Oh, wicked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Original.
Yeah.
Good stuff, man.
All right, family. Thanks a lot for popping by. Stephen, so
Thank you,
grateful.
Stephen.
Thank you for your time.
Respect Kadeem as well.
And yes, Kadeem.
Yes,
Yeah,
Kadeem.
thanks very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and just keep doing the great works that you're doing, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Welcome to pop in if you've got any time. We're here every Wednesday.
Okay, well, I'm mindful of that now, and I'll be glad to come back and join you guys.
Yes, man.
Yeah, pleased to have met you.
Thank you so
Lovely
much.
to meet everybody, man.
Bless.
Thanks.
All right, nice one.